All right, morning, y'all. I hope that you are all holding up okay during the lockdown and quarantine and stuff. So let's just go ahead and get started on what we want to talk about today. So if you haven't already reviewed the content on Canvas, which I'm sure you've probably seen a little bit of it since you're seeing the video, you might have gone over what's expected for the first assignment. And in order to do that, we need to talk a little bit more about what a game mechanic is. Now, this is one of my favorite discussions to talk about. I love doing it with you guys present, so we might even talk a little bit about it during our call later this afternoon or later morning today. But for now, I would just like to make sure that we go over very specific points when you're available to do so. So let's just go ahead and get started with that. All right, so this is going to be my talk, which you will also have access to on our Canvas, and it's called The Mechanic and the Player. So, woo, excuse me. Now, we all know what games are, which is actually kind of an interesting question. What is a game? And there are probably entire courses on just this topic, about what is a game, what makes a game, and the philosophy around that. And while I am not going to hold it too tight of a definition, meaning it has to have a win condition or a loss condition, I will say that it does have to have a mechanic, and it does have to have a playable loop. And we'll talk about what loops are a little bit later. Okay, so this gentleman here, his name is Chris Crawford. He is a game designer, and he came up with a real nice hierarchy to help us understand the differences between objects, toys, and games. And we're going to go over that right now. All right, so think of an object. If you can interact with it and it's entertaining or fun, we'll call it a plaything, right? Does it have a goal is the first question. Think of that object. Doesn't matter what it is. Does it have a goal? If it does not, it's a toy. If it does, we'll call it a challenge. All right. Can toys be challenges? Yes, but this is just to help us understand. Also, something to know, these definitions and these frameworks that we're discussing now, they're very fluid. And even in the industry, they tend to change and grow or become more concise over time, because video games are still kind of new as far as a science to study, even though they've been around for a few decades. So while maybe not all of the definitions that you can see here moving forward fit your understanding, this is just something to help us kind of create a little bit of structure for what we're going to be making later. And that's okay. I also encourage the challenge. So if you have a little bit of feedback of like, but what about this game? And what about this? We can talk about that. All right. So, does it have a goal? No, it is a toy. Yes, it is a challenge. Does the challenge have other agents? So, if it does not, it is a puzzle. And if it does, it is a conflict. So, an agent is interesting because it doesn't necessarily have to be a player. It can also be AI or a rule or another constraint within the game. Let's keep going, and we can come back to that if we need to. Do the agents interact with each other? If they do not, we have a competition, and if they do, we have a game. And actually, let me write that in here so that we... Competition. That's not how you spell competition. Thank goodness for spell check. Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about this right here. This gets weird because you're like, wait a minute. The other agents don't necessarily interact with each other, but how is that not a game? So let's talk about some examples about competitions that aren't really considered games. If you think of any. One of my favorite examples of this is thinking about the Olympic sports. Now, they are called games, this is true, but we don't really think about them the same way we think of other games, like tabletop games, video games, or games that we play with each other, even sports, right? Because when you think of like football or baseball, agents are interacting with each other. That feels like a game. But like, say, figure skating, they're competing. There is a winner and a loser, or maybe multiple winners of different rankings, right? But they don't interact with each other. And so we'll throw the word around game in that term loosely, but we don't really make a lot of games where our agents don't interact with each other. So for the terms of our mechanics and how we'll be designing moving forward, we're going to stick to this. Agents should be interacting with each other. Sometimes folks will have ideas to get a little experimental with this, and I would love to hear them. So if any time during our prototyping assignments you have an idea that you really want to go over and it doesn't quite fit this framework, talk to me, tell me your idea, and we'll see if we can move forward with it and if it is worth exploring moving forward. I would actually say they're all worth moving forward, but for the sake of our class and our grades. Okay. Okay, so you said games have to have other agents. I play one-player games all the time. This is true, and this kind of comes back to how agents don't necessarily have to be another player, right? So you've probably interacted with some pretty combative AI that can kill you or stop you. Those are considered other agents. Board pieces or rules within a game, say like, you say one-player game, Solitaire. In this case, the agents are the cards that are flipped over if you do follow the rules. You have to kind of figure out a way to kind of get around them and see if you can actually win. So an agent doesn't have to be a person or a player, or even a representative of a person or a player, but you do have to interact with it, and it is kind of an entity or a thing that is stopping you from reaching your goal. All right, so why does this hierarchy matter? Because we have to start with the toy. We have to think about what is it that's fun and playful, right? How many of you have sat down with stuff that didn't have goals or challenges and you played with them? Well, you have, but probably not recently, not since you were a kid. So it's important now that you take some time, and there will be an assignment later on, for you to sit down, play with some toys, and then tell me about where you found fun and enjoyment just playing with the toys. And then I want you to tell me what happened. Did you create a little challenge? Did you create rules? Did you give yourself something to do, like a goal? But you have to start with a toy. So many game designs, especially in mobile, start with just an enjoyable interaction with something that we build from moving later. So when you think about, say, tabletop RPGs or like Warhammer, figurines, just like that when we were kids, we would play with dolls or tiny toys and create little stories with them. And then a lot of design work later, we have things like D&D and Pathfinder and Warhammer. Okay, so moving on. All right, so the mechanic. This is really fun to talk about. It can be difficult to explain to someone else because everybody seems to have a definition and just sort of know what we're talking about. If you were to talk to any number of designers in the industry, everybody agrees that they know what a mechanic is, but not everybody agrees on the definition of what it is. But when we talk about a game's mechanic, we can kind of just intuitively understand what they're talking about. So for this, I want to actually create a definition for you to know explicitly what a mechanic will mean in this class and when we talk about it. I think personally that this definition should be adopted all over, but just know that there's some folks out there that don't philosophically agree with this, and that's okay. All right, so mechanics are often interchangeable with goals or objectives, but they aren't really mechanics. Not really. So back in the day, I'm going to say this was about a 15-year-old book. This book came out called Level Up, A Guide to Great Video Game Design. And it is a fantastic read. You should check it out. But it defines game mechanics are an item or element that players interact with to create or aid with gameplay. That would mean that when you think of some games, these words would mean that they are the mechanic. Moving platforms, opening doors, or guns. Not the action of opening doors, but doors that open. Or platforms that move. A gun. So they're saying that the objects in the game that you interact with, those are the mechanics. I don't agree with that. Personally, I think that it is a deeper meaning than that specific definition. This is an example of how it's evolved over time. So, according to this, the object in a game is a mechanic, but a mechanic is more to me than just the object. This is a quick screenshot of a simple box in a Unity game engine. If I were to look at that, it itself is not necessarily a mechanic, but we'll go into what I think it is. Okay. So other folks, verbs are mechanics. It is what you do. For example, Portal's shooting, or shooting, we'll say. In Portal, it's shooting. So let me actually reframe that. There we go. Grammar, this is why it matters. So in Portal's shooting verb would be considered the mechanic. Mario's jumping, or do a thing, right? I still don't agree that this alone is the definition of a mechanic. Shooting, jumping, do the thing, right? It's closer, but here's actually why I don't agree with this. For example, let's talk about Super Mario Brothers for just a second. This shot shows Mario jumping on a platform, and it's actually kind of a fun platform because it like moves and stuff. And also jumping on an enemy. Now both are jumping, both are the same button, but they are arguably very different mechanics. And the reason why is that the way you think about approaching this problem of jumping on a platform versus jumping on an enemy are very different. So that actually brings me to what I feel is a closer definition to a mechanic. Not the platform, not the jumping, but the action of the verb and the object together and the relationship they have. So, the mechanics are jumping across a moving platform, or shooting portals into a wall, or jumping on top of an enemy, in this case to defeat it or survive. So, a mechanic is, and I love this because the Valve developer community agrees with me, a game mechanic is an interaction between the players and one or more game elements. It's what you do with the thing. The verb with the noun, not just one or the other. So, this brings me to part 2. Game mechanic is an interaction between players and one or more game elements. So our next step on our hierarchy is the challenge. Once you've created your mechanic and you play it with it like a toy, what challenges do you create for yourself? While playing, ask yourself, would this be cool if I could ... fill in the blank. I'm about to sneeze. Okay. All right. Now, remember, it's extremely important to know and to see that what you are interacting with is through your own lens and your experience. You are playing as someone who likes what you like, and that's okay. But remember, when we get into playtesting later on, and unfortunately it's not going to be too much in this class, but with us being on lockdown, you'll experience players approaching problems very differently than you have. Sometimes players who've never played games at all. So, what kind of player are you? Let's see. As designers, we have a responsibility because we are advocates for the player. It starts to boil down to a little bit about design philosophy, but every game designer is here for our players. And that can be tough because right now, maybe we want to just make something for ourselves. And that's okay. It's actually a great place to start in thinking about what kind of player are you and you wanting to make something for more players who are like you. You're still the advocate for your player. All right, here is a short list of different types of players that there are so many more, but these are some of the bigger categories that could probably really identify with. A really good game will make sure that it is appealing to at least one of these. Fantastic games, probably 2 or 3, but maybe not necessarily all of them, and that's okay. So if you look at this list, the competitor, the explorer, the joker, the artist, the director, the storyteller, the performer, the craftsman, do you think you can maybe identify with any one of these? I bet you could probably do at least one, maybe a lot more than that. I know I identify with about 3 or 4 of these. So the performer, the explorer, the artist, the craftsman. I've done the other stuff too, but I like those the best. Okay. You know, if you're a little unsure about what it means to be either of these players, here's a quick little description of what these types of players tend to gravitate to. Now, this is just something to consider when you're thinking about who you're developing for and who you are as a player. Okay, so that's all we're going to talk about today. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me here on Canvas, and you should have access to this specific PowerPoint presentation, it's a Google Slides presentation on our Canvas. So the link will be shared today. All right, maybe I'll see you later this afternoon. I keep wanting to say afternoon, but we meet at 10:30. I'll see you later this morning if you want to join the video call. All right? Okay. Later.